The war between humans and the Zerithian Empire had lasted for years, with no clear winner. Skies burned, planets crumbled, and millions had died. Captain Elias Carter, a respected human soldier, had fought in the war for years, believing that peace was impossible. That was until he received an unexpected order. Standing in the War Council chamber, Elias listened as General Vargas spoke. The Zerithians have sent a proposal, a peace treaty, but they demand something in return. Elias frowned. What do they want? The general exchanged looks with the other officers before replying. A marriage. Elias blinked. A what? Not just any marriage, Vargas continued. They want a union between one of their royal family members and a high-ranking human representative. It's symbolic, a political move, and they specifically asked for you. Elias scoffed. Why me? Admiral Hensley sighed. Because of your reputation. You're known for your bravery. They think you'd make a strong symbol of unity. Elias shook his head. This is insane. I'm a soldier, not a politician. Vargas leaned forward. Listen, son, this marriage isn't real. It's just for show, to prove to both sides that peace is possible. Once the treaty is signed, the marriage will be dissolved. Elias exhaled sharply. He had been fighting for so long, seen so much destruction. If this fake marriage could stop the war, could save lives, then maybe it was worth it. After a long pause, he finally said, Fine, I'll do it. A meeting with the alien princess. A few days later, Elias was taken to a Zerithian diplomatic ship where the meeting would take place. The Zerithians were a warrior species, known for their tall, elegant forms, golden eyes, and bioluminescent markings. Elias stood in a grand chamber, waiting. Then she entered. Princess Ayara. She was strikingly beautiful, with dark metallic blue skin that shimmered under the light, and flowing silver hair that moved as if touched by an unseen breeze. Her golden eyes studied Elias with unreadable intensity. She wore an elaborate, regal outfit, but the way she carried herself told Elias one thing. She was a warrior, not just a royal. She stopped a few feet away from him. You are the human I am to marry. Elias crossed his arms. Apparently. She tilted her head. You do not seem pleased. He shrugged. This isn't exactly how I expected my life to go. Ayara studied him for a moment before stepping closer. Neither did I. But if this marriage stops the war, I will accept it. Elias looked into her eyes and saw something unexpected. She wasn't just a cold, calculating alien. She was someone who had also lost much to this war. Maybe they weren't so different after all. The wedding was set, and neither of them knew that this so-called fake marriage was about to change their lives forever. Elias stood in the grand Zerithian temple, surrounded by towering alien warriors, diplomats, and nobles. The air smelled of something strange, like a mix of metal and flowers. At the front of the hall, a massive golden altar shimmered under the soft glow of Zerithian energy crystals. This was it, the wedding. Elias had faced enemy fire, survived battles on distant planets, and fought in brutal hand-to-hand combat. But right now, standing beside Princess Ayara, dressed in elegant royal armor, he felt completely out of place. Ayara, on the other hand, looked calm. Too calm. She didn't show any emotion as she faced the high priest, a tall Zerithian with glowing silver eyes. The priest raised his hands. This union is more than a symbol. It is a bond between two souls, two worlds. Do you both swear to uphold peace between your people? Elias nodded stiffly. I do. Ayara's voice was steady. I do. The priest turned to Elias. Then accept the mark of the royal bond. Elias frowned. Wait, what? Before he could react, Ayara reached out, her fingertips glowing with golden energy. She pressed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. A sharp burning sensation shot through his skin. He gritted his teeth, trying not to show pain as a strange golden symbol formed on his skin. It looked alive, shifting like liquid fire. Elias stumbled back. What the hell is this? I thought this was just a ceremony. Ayara finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. It is more than that. The bond is real. His heart pounded. What had he just agreed to? The shocking truth. After the ceremony, Elias was taken to a private chamber inside the palace. His skin still tingled where the mark had been placed. Ayara entered, her hands folded behind her back. You are angry. Elias stood up. Damn right, I am. What did you do to me? She sighed. The royal bond is an ancient tradition. It connects us, ensures loyalty. Elias's eyes narrowed. Loyalty? You mean I can't just walk away? Ayara hesitated before answering. No. If you leave me, the bond will weaken us both. If I die, you will feel it. Elias stared at her, horrified. You're telling me we're stuck like this, forever? Ayara met his gaze. Yes. Silence filled the room. The weight of those words crushed Elias's thoughts. This wasn't a fake marriage. It was real. And now, he had no way out. Elias paced across the grand chamber, his fists clenched. His entire life had just changed, and he hadn't even been given a choice, a royal bond. A connection that couldn't be broken. This was not what he signed up for. Ayara stood calmly near the glowing window, looking out at the stars. The Zerithian capital planet was breathtaking. Twin moons glowing in the dark sky. Massive golden cities floating above the surface. It was beautiful, but right now, Elias didn't care about any of it. He turned sharply toward her. You knew, didn't you? You knew this wasn't just a symbolic marriage. Ayara finally looked at him, her golden eyes unreadable. Yes. Elias's jaw tightened. Then why didn't you tell me? She sighed, stepping closer. Because you would have refused. He scoffed. Damn right, I would have refused. This isn't just a deal for peace. This is a permanent connection. I can feel it already. And it was true. The bond was strange, powerful, overwhelming. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he could feel her presence. A soft pull, a constant awareness of her existence. It wasn't like mind reading, but he knew she was there, even without looking at her. Ayara watched him carefully. Would you have accepted if you had known? Elias ran a hand through his hair. No. She nodded as if she expected that answer. Then I made the right choice. His temper flared. The right choice. You forced this on me. Ayara didn't flinch. I did what was necessary. If you had walked away, the war would have continued. Millions more would have died. You would rather have let that happen. Elias opened his mouth to argue, but then he stopped. Damn it. She was right. The war had been brutal. He had lost friends, soldiers, entire colonies to the endless battles. If this bond was the price of peace, wasn't it better than the alternative? Still, it wasn't fair. His life was no longer his own. He took a deep breath, trying to push down his frustration. So what now? Am I just supposed to accept this? Ayara stepped even closer. You can resist all you want, Captain, but the bond is real. You are my mate now, my husband. Her voice softened slightly. And whether you like it or not, I am yours. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know whether to feel trapped or something else. One thing was clear. This marriage was no longer just about politics. And walking away was no longer an option. The days after the wedding passed in a blur of ceremonial meetings, tense negotiations, and endless alien protocol. Elias had expected to be a puppet, a symbol of peace in a marriage that would end once the war was officially over. But nothing was as simple as it seemed. Elias found himself being drawn deeper into Zerithian politics. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the husband of Princess Ayara, a symbol of human Zerithian unity. That meant meetings with the High Council, discussions with military leaders, and endless ceremonial events. It felt like every day was a performance. But beneath the surface of this calm facade, Something was wrong. There were whispers in the palace, eyes that seemed to watch him too closely, people who greeted him with respect, but whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just a pawn in a political game. He was also a target. The first attempt. One evening, after a particularly exhausting meeting with the Zerithian Council, Elias returned to the royal chambers, hoping for a quiet moment to clear his head. But as he entered, the doors slammed shut behind him, locking with an ominous click. Ayara was already there, her back to him as she looked out at the stars. But something felt off. Before Elias could ask what was going on, the lights flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Zerithian soldiers, armed and ready for something. He reached for his blaster, but then he heard a familiar voice. Ayara's voice, calm and steady. "They've come for us, Elias." Elias spun around to face her. "What do you mean?" "They'd come for us." She turned slowly, her face serious. "There are factions within my people who don't want peace. They think I've betrayed my people by choosing you." "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Elias asked, anger rising in his chest. "Because I hoped it would never come to this," she replied softly. "I thought I could control it." Suddenly, the door burst open, and a group of elite Zerithian guards stormed in. They wore dark armor, their weapons drawn. Elias barely had time to react before Ayara stepped in front of him, her hand raised. "Stay back," she commanded. The guards hesitated, clearly respecting her authority. But the lead soldier sneered. "The princess is too soft. The war needs to end on our terms, not yours." Elias's pulse raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. Ayara was right. This wasn't just a political marriage. There were enemies within her own ranks who wanted her dead. And if they couldn't control the peace she brought, they would do anything to destroy it. Without warning, the lead soldier lunged at Ayara, but Elias reacted instinctively, grabbing the man's arm and disarming him in one swift motion. "You'll have to get through me first," Elias growled. The truth sets in. Ayara turned to Elias, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You didn't have to do that." Elias wiped his brow, his heart racing. "I wasn't going to let them take you. Not now." She stepped closer, her voice softer. "And that's the problem. You're not just my husband anymore. You're in this with me, for better or worse. There's no going back." Elias stared at her, realizing the weight of her words. He was trapped, but maybe this time it wasn't such a bad thing. There were enemies at every turn, but together they would fight them. Together they could win. The tension in the Zerithian capital was palpable, even more so after the attempted attack on Elias and Ayara. The traitorous faction within the Zerithian military had made their move, but Ayara and Elias had stopped them, barely. The palace guards had subdued the intruders, but the damage had been done. The cracks in the treaty were starting to show. For the next few days, Elias and Ayara were forced to keep a low profile. They couldn't trust anyone, not even the closest allies in Ayara's court. Every conversation felt like a potential threat, every gesture a hidden warning. Even though they were supposed to be the symbol of peace, Elias felt more like a prisoner than a partner. Back on Earth, the human government had been monitoring the situation, and they weren't happy. The alliance was never meant to be permanent, and now that the war had stopped, they demanded Elias's return. The message arrived in a stark communication. "Return immediately. Your mission is complete. Your continued stay in the Zerithian capital jeopardizes Earth's interests." Elias felt his stomach churn as he read the words. He had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier. The human leadership didn't understand the stakes. This marriage was more than just a political move. It was life or death for both him and Ayara. But if he went back to Earth, if he broke the bond, Ayara would die. The meeting with the council. The next day, Elias and Ayara were summoned to a private council meeting in the royal palace. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of bioluminescent crystals. The council members were seated at a long, oval table, their faces hidden beneath shadows. Ayara stood beside Elias, her presence as commanding as ever. But Elias could sense her unease. They were not alone. General Varen, a high-ranking Zerethian military leader and Ayara's most trusted advisor, was at the head of the table. His cold eyes locked with Elias's as soon as he entered. "The peace is fragile," General Varen began, his voice like gravel. "There are forces in the Empire who believe the war can still be won. We must ensure that the humans remain loyal to our cause." Elias swallowed. Loyalty. That was the word on everyone's lips, but no one understood what it truly meant. He wasn't here to serve anyone. He was here to help end a war. Ayara stepped forward, her voice strong. "The marriage between Elias and me was a symbol of peace, nothing more. The treaty holds. The war is over." But her words didn't calm the council. Varen's gaze never left Elias, and yet the humans are already questioning the alliance. If they pull out, the peace will crumble. Elias's heart pounded. The pressure was building, and he could feel it in his chest, like the air was growing too thin. He had been hoping to go back to Earth, but now it was clear that if he did, the consequences would be devastating. The war might start again, and this time it could be worse. The decision. After hours of heated discussion, the meeting ended with no clear solution. The council had made one thing clear: Elias and Ayara's marriage wasn't just about their personal bond. It was the key to keeping the peace intact. Ayara turned to Elias as they left the chamber, her expression unreadable. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They will always see you as a symbol, a way to control the peace." Elias's mind raced. He could feel the weight of her words. The treaty was already on the edge, and now his presence in the Zerethian capital was more important than ever. If he left, the peace would fall apart. But staying meant facing enemies within both his own people and the Zerethians. "Maybe we can find a way to make this work," Elias said, though the words didn't sound convincing. He wasn't sure what was worse, staying and facing the dangers ahead, or leaving and betraying everything he had worked for. Ayara looked at him, her golden eyes full of something unexpected. "Trust. I believe in you, Elias." Elias nodded, his heart heavy. For better or worse, he was stuck. And now he had to make sure they both survived the coming storm. Days passed, and Elias continued to navigate the tense political landscape of the Zerethian Empire. The threats against him and Ayara seemed to grow stronger by the day. It wasn't just about the war anymore. It was about control, who held it, and who would be forced to bow. Elias could feel the pressure building in his chest, as if the entire weight of the galaxy was sitting on his shoulders. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite explain. He had always been a soldier, strong, capable, trained for battle. But since the ceremony, since the bond with Ayara had been sealed, something inside him had changed. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, feeling more connected to her, sensing her presence in his thoughts. But the more he experienced it, the more he realized that it wasn't just mental. His body was different. The first sign. One morning, while walking through the palace grounds, Elias tried to shake off the unease in his chest. His hands were clammy, his head heavy. As he stepped into the royal gardens, he noticed a group of Zerethian soldiers sparring near the courtyard. They were massive, stronger than humans by nature, their bodies honed for combat. Elias had trained alongside elite forces on Earth, but these aliens were on a different level. Still, he couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence rising in him. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Mind if I join?" The soldiers paused, eyeing him with skepticism. Captain Elias Carter, the human soldier who had married their princess. It wasn't a usual sight. The leader of the group, Surgeon Tar, sneered. "You want to fight with us, human. Let's see how long you last." Elias cracked his knuckles. He had nothing to prove, but something inside him urged him to step up. He had to find out what was going on with him. The sparring began. At first, Elias struggled. The Zerithians were fast, strong, and he could feel the weight of their movements. But then, something shifted. He dodged a punch, and for a moment, he wasn't just reacting. He was anticipating their moves. The next punch came faster, but Elias was already moving, his reflexes almost unnatural. He was faster than he'd ever been. He grabbed Tar's arm and twisted, throwing him to the ground in a move that was so fluid it felt like it had been trained into him from birth. The soldiers around him stared, wide-eyed. Tar stood slowly, brushing himself off. Impressive. What's your secret? Elias was just as shocked as the others. What was happening to him? He looked down at his hands, feeling a strange energy coursing through his veins. It was as if the bond with Ayara was doing something to his body, something beyond just emotions. Ayara's explanation. Later that evening, Ayara found Elias in the royal garden, lost in thought. She could sense his confusion. "You felt it, didn't you?" she asked softly. Elias looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What is happening to me, Ayara? I've always been strong, but this is different. I feel like I have more strength, more speed. It's like like you're one of us." She finished for him. He nodded slowly. "Exactly, but I don't understand. How?" Ayara took a deep breath, stepping closer. "The bond we share is more than just emotional. It's a part of me that is fused with you. When you accepted me, you didn't just agree to be my partner. You became part of our royal bloodline. You have inherited more than just the title of husband. You now carry some of our strength." Elias blinked. "Wait, are you saying that the bond changed me?" Ayara smiled, her golden eyes glowing softly. "Yes, you are no longer just human. You are part Zerithian, part of a royal line that has lived for centuries. The mark that I placed on you has connected us in more ways than I think either of us realized." Elias's mind raced. He wasn't sure if this was a blessing or a curse, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something else now, something much more powerful. But with this new power came new dangers. Elias wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let anyone use him or Ayara for their own gain. Together, they would face whatever came next, no matter what it took. The peaceful air of the Zerithian capital had always seemed deceptive, but now it felt downright suffocating. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking on a razor's edge. Each step he took, each person he passed in the palace halls, felt like a calculated move in some game of politics that he didn't fully understand. The bond with Ayara had made him stronger, faster, more aware. But that same bond seemed to draw attention, and not all of it was friendly. One evening, Elias found himself summoned to another council meeting. He and Ayara had been discussing ways to strengthen the peace treaty when a disturbing message arrived. Ayara had looked at the message with a frown, her face hardening. "There's something wrong. The council has changed their plans." "What do you mean?" Elias asked, already sensing the unease in her voice. "The council, some members, believe the treaty is too fragile. They want to test us, to see how far they can push." Ayara's voice was sharp. "They want to test you. They've arranged for an escort mission that I didn't approve of." Elias's blood ran cold. "An escort mission? A mission for me, or for us?" Ayara hesitated. "For you. They don't trust you fully. There are some who believe your power is growing too quickly. They want to control you, and they think the best way to do that is to separate us for a time." The trap. Later that evening, Elias left the palace to carry out the so-called mission. It was a simple escort job, or so he had been told. He would be guiding an important Zerithian official from one of the royal houses through a less secure part of the capital. Nothing too dangerous, nothing to raise alarms. But the moment he stepped out of the palace gates, Elias could feel something was wrong. The streets were quieter than usual, the air heavier, like a storm was brewing. His senses, sharpened by the bond with Ayara, prickled with an odd unease. Something was watching him. He reached for his sidearm, but before he could draw it, a sudden rush of movement came from behind. He spun around just in time to see 3 figures leap at him from the shadows. The first attacker caught him off guard, slamming him to the ground with surprising force. Elias gritted his teeth and kicked upward, knocking the soldier off him. But before he could stand, the second figure grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're coming with us, human." Elias didn't have time to think. With superhuman speed, thanks to the bond with Ayara, he broke free, sending the second attacker crashing into a nearby stone wall. But then, more figures appeared. He was surrounded. In that moment, it hit him. This was no ordinary mission. It was a trap. The council had arranged this not to test him, but to capture him. They had been watching, waiting for a reason to remove him from Ayara's side. Ayara's warning. Elias fought back, but his attackers were too many. They were Zerithian soldiers, and while Elias was stronger than any human, he wasn't invincible. One of the soldiers managed to land a powerful blow to his chest, knocking him unconscious. When Elias woke, he found himself bound and unconscious in a dark room. His head throbbed, and his thoughts were fuzzy. The cold metal shackles around his wrists reminded him that he was no longer in control. He tried to focus, but the room was silent, except for a faint hum of energy. Suddenly, the door opened and a shadow entered. "Ayara," Elias whispered, barely able to keep his voice steady. "No, it's not her," the figure said, stepping into the light. It was General Varen, the one man who had always kept his distance from Ayara, and seemed to be against the peace from the beginning. "I knew this day would come, human," Varen said, his voice cold. "The princess was weak to trust you. You've changed everything. Now, I will make sure you never see her again." Elias's heart sank. This was no longer just about peace. It was about control. And Ayara's enemies were closing in. The real enemy. Varen stepped closer, his smile cruel. "You think you can stop us, human? You've been a useful tool, but your time has come." Elias struggled against the restraints, his heart racing. He couldn't give up. Not now. Ayara needed him. He focused all his energy, drawing from the power of the bond with her. The shackles didn't stand a chance. With one final forceful twist, Elias broke free. He didn't have much time. He had to find Ayara before it was too late. Elias's heart was pounding as he rushed through the dark, narrow corridors of the Zerithian palace. The bonds had broken. He was free now, but he knew time was running out. Varen and his soldiers were only a few steps behind, and the danger was growing with every passing second. He had to find Ayara. She was the only thing that mattered now. The peace treaty, the marriage, the bond, they were all just a means to an end. The true reason he had stayed, the reason he fought, was because of her. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He rounded a corner and saw a group of Zerithian guards up ahead. They were blocking the path to Ayara's private chambers. The soldiers had their weapons drawn and were clearly waiting for someone, or something, to come through. Elias gritted his teeth. He didn't have time for a fight, but he wasn't about to let anyone stop him. With a swift motion, he pulled out his sidearm and knocked out the first soldier who got too close. Another came at him, but Elias used his enhanced strength to disarm him, sending him crashing to the ground. The soldiers didn't expect Elias to be this fast, this powerful. They were used to seeing him as just a human soldier, but now they were seeing the truth. He was more than that. Ayara in danger. Elias broke through the final line of defense, kicking down the door to Ayara's chambers. The room was dark, but he could see her, standing at the far side, surrounded by Varen and his loyalists. Ayara looked calm, but Elias could see the tension in her posture. She was in danger, and there was no way he was going to let them take her. "Stay back," Varen shouted, his voice dripping with venom. You've messed everything up, human. You were never supposed to be a part of this. Elias stepped forward, his voice low but full of determination. You'll have to get through me first. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Ayara, her eyes glowing with intensity, stepped forward, her hand held up. Enough, she commanded. Her voice was a wave of power that seemed to stop everyone in their tracks. Varen's face twisted in frustration. You would side with him, a human. Ayara's golden eyes locked with Elias's, and for the first time, her gaze softened. He's not just a human. He's mine, and I'm not letting anyone take him, or the peace we fought for. Elias's heart swelled at her words. He knew this was the moment. This was the choice they both had to make. To fight, or to give up everything. The final stand. The soldiers hesitated, unsure what to do next. They had never seen Ayara like this. Fierce, determined, and ready to protect what she loved. But Varen wasn't so easily swayed. He turned to his men. Take her down. Now. In that instant, the room erupted into chaos. Elias fought with everything he had. He moved with impossible speed, knocking out one soldier after another, all while keeping Ayara safe. His strength, his connection to her, it was like nothing he'd ever experienced. He was fighting for her, and for everything they had worked for. Ayara joined him in the battle, her own skills surprising Elias as she fought with grace and precision. Together, they were unstoppable. The remaining soldiers, realizing they were no match for the united couple, began to retreat. Varen, his face twisted with rage, turned to flee, but Elias had had enough. With one last surge of energy, Elias tackled him to the ground. This ends now, Varen. He grabbed the traitor by the collar, lifting him off the ground. You've lost. The war is over. Varen spat, but there was no fight left in him. You're a fool, human. You'll regret this. Elias looked over at Ayara, who had stepped forward, her eyes full of fire. Not today. This is our future now. A confession. As the last of the soldiers were taken into custody, Elias and Ayara stood together in the aftermath, their breaths heavy but their resolve clear. The battle was over. The peace which they had fought so hard for was theirs to hold. Elias turned to Ayara, his heart pounding. The bond between them had always been there, but now he understood it fully. He wasn't just a soldier. He was her partner, her equal. Ayara, he said softly, taking her hand. I didn't just stay for the treaty. I stayed because of you. I'm yours, completely. Ayara smiled, her eyes warm with affection. And I am yours, Elias, for always. Their lips met in a soft, gentle kiss, a promise of everything they had fought for, and everything they would continue to fight for. Together, the palace was quieter now. The echoes of battle had faded, and the tense atmosphere that once clung to every hallway seemed to lift, leaving a calmness in its place. The traitor had been dealt with, and with him, the threat to the peace that Elias and Ayara had worked so hard to establish. But now, a new chapter awaited them. Elias stood beside Ayara on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the sprawling city below. The view was breathtaking. Zerithian towers gleamed under the twin moons, and the streets, once tense with fear, now seemed to glow with a new kind of life. I never thought it would end like this, Elias said, his voice low. I thought I'd be going back to Earth, to my people, when the war was over. But this feels different. Ayara turned to him, her golden eyes soft yet filled with a strength that had always captivated him. You've changed the course of history, Elias. We've both changed it. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. The war is over. There are those who will still challenge us, but we will face them together. Elias squeezed her hand. He didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. He wasn't facing it alone. They had come a long way from the first moment of their marriage, when it had all seemed like a mere political arrangement. They had faced betrayal, danger, and doubt, but through it all, their bond had only grown stronger. And now, with the Zerithian Empire beginning to accept the peace that he and Adara had fought so hard for, Ilias knew that the battle was over. But their true fight was only just beginning. The choice ahead. The next day, Elias and Ayara stood in front of the Zerithian Council, the final step toward solidifying the peace. The council chamber was large, filled with the most powerful leaders of the empire. They sat in high, ornate chairs, their eyes narrowed as they watched the couple. Elias could feel the weight of the moment. He had been called here not just as Ayara's husband, but as someone who had proven himself to be an equal partner in their fight for peace. "The war is over," Ayara began, her voice clear and strong. "The peace is ours to hold, and the future of the Zerithian Empire lies in our hands. Together." She paused, looking around the room. "We ask for your trust, not just in me, but in Elias as well." Elias stepped forward, his confidence growing with every word she spoke. "We've both sacrificed to get here. I'm not just a human soldier. I'm a part of this empire now, in more ways than one." He met the eyes of the council members. "I don't expect everyone to trust me, but I promise you this, I will fight for the peace we forge. For all of us." The room was silent for a long moment. Ayara's presence beside him made him feel stronger, like there was nothing they couldn't face together. Finally, one of the council members stood up, an older Zerithian with silver markings running across his face. "I have seen what you've done, human," the counselor said, "and I see the bond between you two. It is unlike anything I have ever seen." He paused, glancing at the others. "I am willing to trust you." One by one, other council members nodded in agreement, until the entire council had given their silent approval. The peace was sealed. Building the future. The council meeting ended, and Elias found himself standing beside Ayara once more, their hands still clasped. As they walked out of the grand chamber, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They had made it. They had changed the future for their people and for each other. But there was still so much to do. The Zerithian Empire was rebuilding, and Earth, despite their peace with the Zerithians, still had questions. There would be no shortage of challenges ahead. Elias looked at Ayara, his heart full of gratitude and hope. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ayara smiled, her golden eyes soft with affection. "Yes, we have. But the journey doesn't end here. Together, we will continue to build a future." And for the first time, Elias understood that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to create, with Ayara by his side. Together, they would face whatever came next. The peace they had fought for was just the beginning of their new life, a life they would share with their people, side by side. And nothing, not even the darkest of enemies, could ever take that away from them. Elias and Ayara stood on the edge of the palace balcony, overlooking the sprawling city below. The twin moons hung in the sky, casting a soft glow over the land. The Zerithian Empire, once a place of war and fear, now felt full of promise and hope. Their promise. For Elias, the last few months had been a whirlwind. The war, the bond, the betrayal, the peace, it all felt like a distant memory now. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something unbreakable. Ayara stood next to him, her hand gently resting in his. She had always been a warrior princess, strong and confident, but Elias had seen a different side of her, one full of compassion, courage, and a love that ran deeper than any battle. "You know," Elias said, his voice soft, "I never imagined my life would lead me here, to a planet like this, to a future with you." Ayara smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the stars above. "I never thought I'd fall in love with a human, but now I can't imagine a world without you." Elias turned to face her, his heart swelling with emotion. "You've changed everything for me, Ayara. I was just a soldier before, fighting for survival. But now, I have a purpose, a real future." Ayara stepped closer, her face serious for a moment. "And you'll have a future here. With me. We've both made sacrifices for peace, for this world we've created together. But I promise you, it will be worth it." Elias reached up, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. "We've already proven that we're stronger than anything that's come our way. No matter what happens next, we'll face it together." She nodded, her smile returning. Yes, together. The weight of the future. While the world around them was beginning to settle, Elias knew that peace was not something to be taken for granted. There were still challenges ahead, factions that resisted the alliance, challenges with Earth's leadership, and enemies that would always lurk in the shadows. But this time, he wasn't facing it alone. The Zerithian Empire was still rebuilding, and the humans had their own doubts about the bond between him and Ayara. But Elias knew now that he had more than just a symbol of peace to offer. He had strength, love, and determination. And with Ayara by his side, he knew they could overcome anything. Their bond, created in the fires of war and sealed by the unbreakable mark on Elias's chest, was more than just a marriage. It was a connection that couldn't be broken. No one, human, Zerithian, or anything else, could ever take that away from them. A new beginning. In the days that followed, Elias and Ayara worked together to build a future, one that wasn't just about maintaining the peace but about thriving. They traveled together to different Zerithian colonies, meeting leaders, discussing trade, and bringing their message of unity. Their bond wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was a living, breathing force that spread across the galaxy, reminding everyone that peace was possible. At night, Elias and Ayara would sit together, looking out at the stars. There were still many unknowns, many things they hadn't figured out yet, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were building something real, something they could share, something that would last long after the struggles had ended. Elias had started this journey thinking it was just about surviving. But now he saw it was about creating a future. And together, he and Ayara would shape that future, one step at a time. As they stood side by side, their hands intertwined, Elias realized something important. It wasn't just that the war was over. It wasn't even just about the peace they had won. It was about the life they had built together, unbreakable and full of promise. And that was something worth fighting for.